In my opinion, I highly doubt it, because it was a plague quarantine facility back then,
Originally,
and even
Yeah.
even today, the citizens of Venice
right.
seem to have this creepy feeling about Poveglia,
Yes.
that they feel the island is cursed, and you can't
Hmm.
even get any of the Venetian citizens to even talk about it.
Right.
You even mention Poveglia, and
Mhm.
they'll just scatter away from you. They'll ignore you. Um, as Rachel says, it's no one is allowed to visit the island today. It's off limits.
Except, was it
Uh,
purchased privately? Then how does the government have any kind of say over that?
okay, to correct what, or maybe not correct, but to add what Rachel was saying. Yes, the island was put up for sale.
Okay.
Was purchased by a businessman who was going to turn the ruins of all the buildings into a hotel resort.
Mm-hmm.
That fell through. Nothing
Yes,
happened.
Ah, okay.
Nothing happened. None of those buildings have ever even been slightly restored. They're still just
Right.
and dilapidated.
Okay.
So I don't know
Mhm.
what the reason was, but yes, this guy bought the island.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happened, and the Venetian government took the island back from him.
Oh, I see. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Perhaps.
So the island is still abandoned. The buildings are just broken and falling apart.
Just
And
did.
as I
Quite
say,
tragic.
local
The
citizens
hospital's still there, the
seem to
clinic's
be
still there, the church is
absolutely
still there.
terrified of this island. They think it's cursed. They won't go near it.
Right. Which we should, bring up when we do our show on superstition, because again, these kinds of things that prevail, depending on your belief systems and what happens, in your lifetime. But interesting enough, so Rachel, you found this just sort of through research, and you're interested in the island.
Yes.
I'm curious as to what are some of the actual stories, like the ghost stories that are attached to the island. I mean, I can see, the guy climbing up, jumping off, etc. We might have some kind of, spirit perhaps, or at least some residual energy attached to that. But what in terms of this island makes it so different from other places that were also places of burial for the bubonic plague? I mean, London, England had massive burials. What I'm curious about is the bubonic plague people that they sent there. Were there any kind of facilities there at that time, or were they just kind of put there and left to their own devices? They just died on the island.
Yeah.
Then what happened? Because
That's right.
That is to the best of my knowledge.
Mhm.
That's the best of my knowledge. Yes, that's what happened. They were quarantined, left to themselves. When they died, their bodies were burned,
Okay.
and that whole second part of the island, because the island is split into two. It's
Okay.
actually two separate little islands separated by a little channel that goes through. The second island is basically composed of human ash from when all these bodies from the plague were burned.
Right. And they
And
deposited them on
that's what basically created the second part of the island. It's completely made up of human ash.
They were just dumping the ash after the pyres. They were taking the ash and moving it and dumping it into water, and it created its own island, or was there an island?
Yeah, that's basically what my understanding is. Yeah.
I don't know how
That's
that
how
works.
the second part of the island came. But
Yeah.
in addition to that, you want to talk about, okay, well, why is it haunted? I agree with Rachel. It's this doctor that went insane when the island became a mental facility.
Right.
And this crazy doctor.
He claimed it was the
himself
ghost.
from the bell tower.
Mhm.
And it's claimed that his ghost is the dominant one on the island.
If they say hypothetically that gentleman who purchased the island did turn it into a leisure resort, a hotel, for example, would you go and stay there?
Yeah.
Would you, Ian?
I
Would
would,
you do
yeah,
a
sure.
paranormal investigation on the actual hotel?
I
Or
Oh, you bet.
need to. I mean,
because I would.
yeah.
I'm not sure I'd want to stay there overnight, but yeah, I would go with my ghost equipment. My
I'd love
would
to
you?
go there now, as it's abandoned. Never
Oh
mind
yeah,
being a resort. I'd love to go right now and do it, but
me too.
obviously, no one is allowed to go there, so
For the
that
time.
that ends that.
Yeah.
Clearly some people are allowed to go there. Like if you're doing a television show, you can get some kind of permit or permission to go over to the island and, make sure that it's all.
Right, Ghost Adventures did.
But at the same time, I just find these locations interesting because they are so. I don't want to say they're isolated because this is not an isolated island. It is, part of essentially the greater Venice area, at least from what I'm reading here. But it's almost like it's got its own built-in, dark tourism niche that if somebody was to turn it into a resort, it would make sense to turn it into a dark tourism resort as opposed to a spa. And because to me that just seems almost counterproductive. Could you imagine like all these unsuspecting people going to the lovely island of Poveglia and they don't really know the history of the island and they go there and then all this stuff starts happening.
Well, as I say, all the locals think the island is cursed.
Right.
So
Oh
even if
yeah,
it was turned into a resort, you're not getting any of those local people to go there whatsoever.
And you're not going to get them to
oh
work
yeah.
really either because
Yeah, there would be no workers, correct.
locally
Where would you get the hotel staff from? It wouldn't be the locals, that's for sure. Yeah.
and then you've got to
Yeah.
find people who clearly speak
Can't get guides.
several. Well, you could. I mean, you could bring people in that speak multiple languages. That's the beauty of Europe. People speak more than one language, unlike here in North America, where we're limited to, mostly one language. We're lucky if we know any others, but most Europeans know at least 2, 3, 4, some know 5 or 6 languages. And so I think getting staff wouldn't be a problem if you're bringing outside staff in. But it's interesting too because you would have this real conundrum of, having provisions delivered to the island because locals want to, bring a boat over full of provisions, full of food.
No, they won't go near it. The locals won't go near it.
This businessman probably didn't really do a whole lot of research on this island beforehand. I mean, if you think about it, if you were going to do something like this and spend, I don't know what the island cost, but if you were going to spend that kind of money, would you not at least do some research to find out that you're really going to kind of be up the creek without any kind of local support whatsoever on a venture like this? I mean, the haunted aspect aside, the economic aspect of this is a disaster. So yeah. I
think when it comes to developers and businessmen, they don't always have that. They don't take into consideration, hauntings or the history of a building. Some are quite happy to just tear down, something. And
here's something to talk about or something to think about. So the island was used until the late 1960s. Right?
Yeah.
But we have a generation of people that essentially are my age, Ian's age, and we're a little bit older. Now, what happens when that generation ages out of the workforce or ages out of I don't imagine that modern young people are really too concerned about the Poveglia, sort of prehistory or the superstition surrounded by it. I mean, I have young adults and they don't care about that stuff. You know what I mean? It's not like the older people that have grown up with these sort of myths or stories or superstitions. A lot of younger people, they hear it from their grandparents or they might hear it from their parents, but do they really heed it? Right. So I kind of wonder if down the road, another maybe 10 years that this business guy's sitting
I'm
on the
from
property.
an Italian family, and trust me, they're
I,
superstitious. They believe if they saw a black cat, they believe in a generational curse. Like there's things that
well, yes,
that they
but I don't think the young people necessarily do. I mean, I grew up around a lot of Italians. I grew up in a predominantly Italian neighborhood. And while the nonna and, mom, dad might, the young kids never believed in any of that stuff. And those were young kids when I was a kid. And they were like, we don't believe in that stuff. So I think that what happens is as you age out, you do end up losing some of these superstitions, some of these beliefs, some of these things that go along with these places. It doesn't remain, and we do see this over and over again. I mean, case in point, places like Stonehenge that so many hundreds of years ago, people might have been a little bit more concerned about taking rocks from there and doing things, but they certainly weren't concerned in the Victorian era already. They were stealing the monolithic stones and using them for fences and doing, building houses with them and doing all sorts of things. So, I mean, there's these ideas, we kind of think, oh, well, all of them will be like that. But I don't think so. I think the younger generations, as they move forward, they tend to be less, believing or less superstitious. They're moving ahead in a modern world where this stuff is pretty old school to them. Like, what grandma and grandpa are saying, they're not really buying into anymore. I mean, I see it even with my own kids, but I see it with many kids. Like if you talk to younger generation now, they don't believe in things that we believed in when we were kids. So I think that maybe this business guy bought this property with the idea of sitting on it for 20 years and then perhaps, moving along and doing something with it. I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking that 20 years from now, some of these people that believe in the curse or the island being cursed, etc., may not feel that way. When you have new generations of people who kind of think that's just old and outdated. And, I mean, it's happening everywhere.